Have you ever felt like your mind operates on a different frequency? Like the more you think, the more disconnected you become from the world around you? If so, you're not alone. History has shown that the greatest minds, Socrates, Galileo, Nietzsche, Tesla, were misunderstood, rejected, even ridiculed for thinking beyond what society was ready to accept. But why does this happen? Why does intelligence, instead of being embraced, often lead to isolation? Welcome to Psych Secrets, where we uncover the deep psychological truths that shape human behavior. In today's video, we're diving into a topic that explains why society fears deep thinkers and why intelligence, though a gift, can feel like a curse. If you've ever felt alone in your thoughts, if you've ever questioned why your ideas don't seem to resonate with the people around you, stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand why this happens, but also how to navigate a world that often resists the very minds that push it forward. Why society fears deep thinkers, the psychological and social resistance to intelligence. Throughout history, intellectuals, visionaries, and deep thinkers have often been rejected, misunderstood, or even persecuted. From Socrates, who was sentenced to death for questioning Athenian beliefs, to Galileo, who was imprisoned for proving heliocentrism, to Friedrich Nietzsche, whose radical ideas were dismissed during his lifetime but later shaped modern philosophy, the pattern is clear. Society resists those who challenge the status quo. But why does this happen? What makes intelligence so threatening to the collective mindset? The truth is, intelligence is more than just knowledge, it is perspective. A person with great intellect does not simply memorize facts, they analyze, question, and reconstruct ideas. This ability to see through deception, challenge established norms, and expose hidden truths can be unsettling to those who prefer stability, tradition, and certainty. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." This statement captures the core reason why society often resists intellectuals. Deep thinkers force people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, their beliefs, and the systems they live within. Instead of embracing these challenges, many choose denial, avoidance, or even hostility. The mirror effect. Why intelligence triggers insecurity. Unlike physical strength or material wealth, intelligence operates in an internal space. It is directly tied to a person's identity and self-worth. Most people define themselves by their beliefs, opinions, and understanding of the world. When someone questions or contradicts those beliefs, it is not simply perceived as new information. It is felt as a personal attack. Why people react differently to different forms of superiority. If you meet someone who is physically stronger, you may admire their strength but not feel personally threatened. If you meet someone who is wealthier, you may envy them, but their success does not necessarily shake your self-perception. But if you meet someone who is intellectually superior, someone who challenges what you believe to be true, you may instinctively feel defensive, insecure, or even hostile. This is known as the mirror effect, the idea that intelligence does not just introduce new ideas, but reflects the limitations of those around it. People do not always forgive that easily. Psychological studies on social rejection of intelligence. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that people prefer confidence over intelligence in group settings. Even when an intelligent person presented superior arguments, a confident but less knowledgeable person was seen as more persuasive. The backfire effect. A study published in Political Psychology found that when people are confronted with facts that contradict their beliefs, they do not change their minds. Instead, they double down on their existing views, rejecting intelligence rather than updating their knowledge. Real-life example. Have you ever tried to introduce a deep philosophical or scientific concept in a casual conversation, only to be met with blank stares, discomfort, or even frustration? This is not just ignorance, it is a psychological defense mechanism. Many people instinctively shut down, change the subject, or even mock deep thinkers when faced with ideas that challenge their worldview. The neuroscience behind society's rejection of intelligence. The amygdala's role in social rejection. Neuroscientific studies have shown that when people feel intellectually inferior, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes highly active. This means intelligence does not just make people uncomfortable, It can actually trigger a fear response, similar to what one would experience when encountering a physical threat. The group effect: why intelligence is rejected more in social settings. A 2021 Stanford study found that while people may be receptive to intellectuals in one-on-one conversations, in group settings, intelligence is often perceived as a social threat. In private, deep thinkers can inspire admiration and curiosity. In groups, intelligence can disrupt the established social hierarchy. In social settings, status and belonging are often more important than truth. When someone in the group is too intelligent, others may feel outshined and instinctively try to exclude or undermine them. Cognitive biases that contribute to intellectual rejection. The Dunning-Kruger effect. People with low intelligence tend to overestimate their knowledge, while those with high intelligence often doubt themselves. This creates friction. Those who know little often believe they know more than they do, making them more likely to reject deeper thinkers. Status quo bias. The brain prefers familiar ideas over new, complex truths. Intelligence often introduces disruptive thoughts, making people uncomfortable. The ostrich effect. People tend to ignore negative or unsettling information. Deep thinkers often present harsh truths that society prefers to avoid. How deep thinkers can navigate a society that rejects them. Choose your audience wisely. Not every place or person is ready for deep discussions. Save your profound thoughts for those who truly appreciate them. Find like-minded individuals. Seek out books, intellectual circles, or online communities where depth is valued. Master the art of communication. Albert Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." Learn to communicate depth without overwhelming others. Embrace solitude as strength. Use isolation as a tool for intellectual and creative growth. The curse of intelligence. Schopenhauer's perspective. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's most brutally honest philosophers, did not view intelligence as a gift. He saw it as a curse. While many believe that intelligence leads to success, happiness, or social superiority, Schopenhauer argued the opposite. He believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more disillusioned they become with society. Intelligent individuals do not simply observe the world, they see through it, through the illusions, the false comforts, and the self-deceptions that most people rely on to function. This heightened awareness creates a fundamental disconnect between deep thinkers and the rest of society. But why is intelligence so isolating? Schopenhauer's answer lies in the conflict between two opposing forces. The will to live, the irrational force that drives most people to seek comfort, pleasure, and social acceptance. The will to truth, the relentless desire to understand reality, even when it leads to discomfort, alienation, or suffering. For Schopenhauer, most people are ruled by the will to live. They chase money, status, entertainment, and relationships, avoiding anything that disrupts their sense of security. In contrast, intellectuals are driven by the will to truth. They seek to understand existence at its core, even if it means losing the very illusions that make life tolerable. This creates three major problems for highly intelligent individuals. 1. They see through lies and deception. Most human interactions are built on small talk, social games, and polite dishonesty. Society functions on unspoken agreements. People avoid uncomfortable truths, maintain surface-level relationships, and engage in rituals of social validation. But intelligent individuals see through these interactions. They recognize when people are being inauthentic, manipulative, or self-deceptive. Schopenhauer's view on social deception. Schopenhauer believed that most people live in self-delusion. They do not question the rules of society, the meaning of their actions, or the irrationality of their desires. They follow trends without questioning why. They adopt societal beliefs without independent thought. They engage in conversations that lack depth or honesty. For deep thinkers, this can make everyday social interactions feel hollow and meaningless. Example from folklore. In an old Buddhist tale, a wise monk tells a man that enlightenment is both a blessing and a curse. The man asks why. The monk replies, "Because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it." This is the reality for intelligent individuals. They cannot ignore hypocrisy, manipulation, or self-deception, even when everyone around them does. Psychological insight, the illusion of transparency. Studies show that most people overestimate their ability to hide their true emotions. Intelligent people, however, tend to be better at detecting lies, hidden insecurities, and suppressed emotions. This ability can make social interactions exhausting because they constantly notice what others try to ignore. They crave depth in a world that prefers simplicity. The majority of people are content with routine, entertainment, and social validation. They find meaning in work, relationships, and leisure activities without questioning their deeper purpose. But deep thinkers cannot stop questioning. Schopenhauer's view on the burden of depth. For Schopenhauer, intelligence is a curse because it creates dissatisfaction. While most people are entertained by simple pleasures, deep thinkers seek intellectual stimulation. While most people are satisfied with small talk, deep thinkers crave philosophical discussions. While most people accept social conventions, deep thinkers analyze them. This constant hunger for meaning can lead to isolation and frustration because most of society does not share the same depth. Folklore example, the monkey and the moon. In an ancient Chinese fable, a group of monkeys see the reflection of the moon in a pond. Believing it is the real moon, they try desperately to catch it, only to disturb the water and make the reflection disappear. The moral? The search for truth often leads to frustration because the answers are never as clear or as attainable as they seem. For deep thinkers, this endless pursuit of meaning can feel like chasing the moon, always just out of reach. Scientific study, the link between intelligence and dissatisfaction. A 2016 study in the British Journal of Psychology found that highly intelligent individuals tend to be less happy in social environments. They reported lower life satisfaction when forced into meaningless interactions. They found greater fulfillment in solitude, intellectual pursuits, and personal creativity. This suggests that the more intelligent a person is, the harder it is for them to enjoy ordinary social life. They recognize the futility of human desires. Where others chase money, power, relationships, and status, deep thinkers often question the very purpose of these pursuits. They see that material wealth is temporary, power is an illusion, and social status is arbitrary. Schopenhauer's view on the futility of desire. Schopenhauer believed that human desires are like an endless treadmill. As soon as one goal is achieved, another appears. People who get rich still want more money. People who find love still feel unfulfilled. People who achieve power still fear losing it. According to Schopenhauer, most people never realize this because they are too busy chasing the next thing. But deep thinkers see through the cycle, and this can lead to existential despair. Folklore example, the king's endless desire. In an old Indian fable, a king is granted one wish. He wishes that everything he touches turns to gold. At first, he is thrilled until he touches his food, his loved ones, and even himself, and everything turns to lifeless metal. The lesson? Desire, when unchecked, leads to self-destruction. For intelligent people, recognizing this illusion of fulfillment can make ordinary ambitions feel pointless. Scientific study, the paradox of choice. A study by Barry Schwartz found that people who analyze too many options tend to be less happy. The more intelligent a person is, the more they see alternative perspectives, possibilities, and potential regrets. This overthinking can lead to paralysis, indecision, and dissatisfaction. This explains why deep thinkers often struggle to find meaning in conventional success. How deep thinkers can navigate a society that rejects them. If intelligence often leads to isolation, misunderstanding, or rejection, how can deep thinkers survive and thrive in a world that resists them? The answer is not to conform, but to adapt strategically, to learn when to speak, when to observe, and how to use intelligence as a tool for progress rather than a source of alienation. Hack. Choose your audience wisely. One of the biggest mistakes deep thinkers make is assuming that everyone is open to profound discussions. The truth is, most people aren't ready for deep ideas, not because they're unintelligent, but because they're uncomfortable with complexity. Psychological insight, cognitive ease. Studies in psychology show that the brain prefers simple, familiar information over complex, challenging concepts. When faced with deep or abstract ideas, most people experience cognitive strain, which leads them to reject the information rather than engage with it. This is why complex truths are often ignored, while simplistic ideas spread faster. Real-life example. Have you ever tried explaining a philosophical or scientific concept to someone, only for them to change the subject or dismiss it? This isn't because they lack intelligence, it's because their brain perceives deep thought as effortful and unnecessary. Solution: choose your audience carefully. Not everyone is ready for deep discussions. Save your profound insights for those who appreciate them, not for those who resist them. When speaking to people who prefer simplicity, adjust your approach. Use analogies, stories, and ease them into complexity rather than overwhelming them. Find like-minded individuals. No matter how rare deep thinkers may be, they exist, and finding them can be life-changing. The problem is, society does not naturally bring intellectuals together. Instead, it isolates them by prioritizing social conformity over individual thought. Scientific insight, the power of intellectual circles. History shows that great thinkers rarely succeed alone. From Plato's Academy to the Vienna Circle, deep thinkers have always thrived when they form communities of like-minded individuals. A study from the University of Oxford found that individuals who engage in intellectually stimulating discussions experience higher life satisfaction and reduced feelings of isolation. Example from history: J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis formed a private discussion group called the Inklings, where they shared ideas that would later influence some of the greatest works of literature. Without this intellectual exchange, their ideas might have remained undeveloped. Solution: actively seek out like-minded individuals. Engage in philosophical groups, online forums, book clubs, or academic circles. If you don't find the right community, create one. Master the art of communication. It's not enough to have deep ideas. You need to know how to communicate them. Albert Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." Deep thinkers often struggle because they assume that complexity is necessary for intelligence. But the greatest minds in history were those who take profound ideas and make them accessible to others. Psychological insight, the curse of knowledge. Studies in cognitive science show that experts often struggle to explain concepts in simple terms because they forget what it was like to not understand the subject. This is called the curse of knowledge, a phenomenon where people with expertise fail to communicate effectively because they assume others share their level of understanding. Folklore example: the blind men and the elephant. In an ancient parable, several blind men encounter an elephant, each touching a different part. One touches the trunk and says, "It's a snake." Another touches the leg and says, "It's a tree." Another touches the ear and says, "It's a fan." Each one has part of the truth, but none see the full picture. Moral: if you want people to understand a complex truth, help them piece together the picture. Don't expect them to see it all at once. Solution: learn to communicate effectively. Instead of using abstract jargon, break concepts down into relatable examples. Use storytelling, analogies, and simple language to make deep ideas accessible. Embrace solitude as strength. Most people fear isolation, but deep thinkers need solitude, not as a punishment, but as a powerful tool for growth. Schopenhauer viewed solitude as essential for intellectual and creative development. Scientific insight, the link between solitude and creativity. A study from Harvard University found that individuals who spend time in solitude develop greater creativity and problem-solving skills. Solitude allows for deep reflection, idea incubation, and independent thought, things that are impossible in noisy, distraction-filled environments. A folklore example, the hermit and the village. In a Tibetan legend, a man seeking wisdom left his village to meditate in the mountains. Years later, he returned and was mocked for his isolation. But when a crisis struck the village, he was the only one with the clarity and wisdom to guide them through it. Solution: view solitude not as loneliness, but as an advantage. Use alone time to read, write, reflect, and develop your own thoughts. Embrace moments of solitude as periods of deep learning. Intelligence moves the world even if society rejects it. Throughout history, the most brilliant minds have often been outcasts. Society fears what it does not understand, and intelligence, especially the kind that questions the status quo, has always been a threat to established norms. But despite rejection, it is deep thinkers who push humanity forward. The paradox is clear. Society needs intelligence to evolve, yet it often resists it. The psychology of rejection: why society resists intelligence. Psychologists have long studied why highly intelligent individuals are often met with hostility rather than admiration. The answer lies in three key psychological principles. The status quo bias: people naturally resist change even when it benefits them. The backfire effect: when presented with new, uncomfortable truths, people tend to reject them even more aggressively. The mirror effect: intelligence reflects the limitations of those who are less willing to think critically, triggering insecurity. This explains why history has repeatedly punished its most brilliant minds, only to later celebrate them. Socrates chose death over abandoning his principles. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, spent his life questioning widely accepted beliefs. He encouraged people to think critically, challenge authority, and seek truth rather than blindly follow tradition. But instead of being rewarded for his wisdom, he was put on trial for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. His real crime? Encouraging people to think for themselves. The man who spoke the truth. In an ancient parable, a wise man enters a village and tells the people that the water in their well has been poisoned. Rather than listen, the villagers accuse him of spreading fear. They exile him, only to later suffer from the very poison he tried to warn them about. Lesson: people often reject truth before they accept it. Socrates was given two choices: renounce his beliefs and live, stand by his principles and face execution. He chose death, famously saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Decades later, the world recognized his contributions to philosophy, but at the time he was seen as a dangerous disruptor. Galileo faced imprisonment for telling the truth. Galileo, one of the greatest scientific minds in history, made a discovery that shook the foundations of the world. The Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. At the time, the church held absolute power over knowledge. To suggest that the Earth was not the center of the universe was seen as blasphemy. Rather than being celebrated, Galileo was threatened with torture, forced to publicly deny his findings, sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. Scientific insight: the fear of new ideas. Neuroscience shows that when people encounter new challenging ideas, their brain reacts as if they are experiencing physical danger. This is why disruptive thinkers, from Galileo to modern-day innovators, often face hostility rather than acceptance. Example from history: hundreds of years later, the church officially admitted Galileo was right, but only after the world had already accepted his discoveries. Lesson: the truth eventually wins, but those who reveal it often suffer first. Nietzsche was dismissed as insane, then became one of the most influential philosophers of all time. Friedrich Nietzsche was ridiculed, ignored, and dismissed during his lifetime. His ideas were considered too radical, too dangerous. He challenged morality. He questioned religion. He argued that society was built on comforting lies rather than deep truths. People didn't just disagree with Nietzsche, they thought he was insane. The psychology of Nietzsche's rejection. People tend to reject ideas that challenge deeply held beliefs because it forces them to rethink their identity. Nietzsche's philosophy demanded that people take full responsibility for their own existence, a concept many found too uncomfortable to accept. Folklore example: the prophet who spoke too soon. In a Persian legend, a prophet predicts a great flood, warning the people to prepare. They laugh at him, call him crazy, and ignore his advice. When the flood comes, they realize too late that he was right. Visionaries often speak truths that society is not yet ready to hear to genius. Years after Nietzsche's death, his philosophy became one of the most studied and respected in history. He went from being dismissed as a lunatic to being recognized as a genius. The world may resist intelligence, but intelligence moves the world forward. If you ever feel like your ideas are misunderstood, rejected, or ignored, remember, the greatest minds in history face the same struggles. Truth is often rejected before it is accepted. Intelligence is a gift, but it requires patience. The world may not be ready for your ideas today, but one day it will be.